What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Cloudology channel. Welcome back to the stream. So, I know I'm supposed to have Ansible for you guys. I didn't forget. Again, kind of on the busy side, but it's a good busy. But something came up today, actually, and I came across an article. Link to that article is in my description if you would like to read it. But we're going to go over it today, and we're going to read it together a little bit. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to give you the gist of it, but I wanted to talk about companies. Specifically, the companies we're going to be talking about today are Basecamp and Hey, Hey. They have decided to leave the cloud. They decided to pull their resources from the cloud and start buying their own servers, managing their own servers, and doing an on-prem situation for their entire tech stack. From what it seems like on the service level from this article, right? And even as a cloud engineer, even as an infrastructure engineer, a guy that is a big proponent of the cloud, I kind of agree with them, to be honest. And we'll get into why in a little bit, but what is up? Get Money Coding. Smash like. Yes, please do. Thank you. Thank you, Get Money Coding. Make sure you visit Get Money Coding's channel as well, because that dude is on fire, and he has been on fire for quite a while, and he's going to continue to be on fire. So good dude over there. If you're into software development, learning to get into software development, go check out Get Money Coding. But I digress. I agree with them, guys. I agree with that the cloud is not a right solution for everybody. And I understand that, even as a cloud engineer, even as someone who really enjoys the cloud and enjoys the technology and thinks it's cool and thinks he's cool for working in the cloud, I agree with him. It makes sense, or it doesn't make sense for everybody. So let me pull up this article to give a little bit more context about what I'm talking about. So this is an article by David Hansen, entitled "Why We're Leaving the Cloud." So this is kind of his little intro right here, and basically talks about how renting computers is a bad deal for medium-sized companies, and he kind of makes a very valid point. So he goes on to say that cloud excels at two ends of the spectrum: either the site or the company or the business that doesn't really have a lot of infrastructure needs and doesn't have a lot of traffic and doesn't have a lot of services they need to be run in the cloud, or just in general, like very small startups, small business, maybe your mom and pop shop that just has a website up. It's very good for someone like that because they can host their services that they do need, their online ordering systems or their menus if they're a restaurant, or they're very small very small websites. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat. What's up, Max Dignitas? Thank you for jumping over to this stream. And Get Money Coding. Did you guys get mod on the Me chat? Yes, I did get mod privileges on your chat. I was going to ban Max Dignitas, but it didn't let me. But yeah, so essentially, you have that end of the spectrum where you have the mom and pop shop that doesn't really need a lot of compute services, or maybe you're just running like a portfolio website or something like that, just some kind of e-commerce website for yourself, maybe. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, which is your huge, Fortune 500 companies that need all this infrastructure and all this data storage and a whole bunch of stuff that costs them hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars a year, but they can justify that cost because they're a huge company and they have a large profit margin, right? So they're able to kind of write off that cost as a necessary evil. Well, what Mr. David goes on to say here is that for a mid-level company, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And, in previous jobs, I have worked, with mid-level companies that are kind of shocked by the cloud bill that they get once we, built some of these services for them. And they're kind of like, hey, like, is this normal? Is there something wrong with the price? And our answer is typically no. Like, this is kind of how it is, guys. Like, I thought you were kind of aware of that. A lot of mid-sized companies aren't. Maybe they were a small company and kind of like outgrew their current situation, and they're looking for a cloud solution. Well, that cloud solution at a mid-level is going to be pretty expensive for them. So here, specifically, he points out a few good points. Basically, he says it remains a fabulous way to get started when you have no customers, and it'll carry you quite far when you start having some. Then you'll be later faced with a good problem once the bills grow to the stratosphere as usage picks up, but that's a reasonable trade-off, right? The second the second is when your load is highly irregular, when you have wild swings or lowering peaks in usage, when the baseline is a sliver of your largest needs, or when you have no idea whether you need 10 servers or 100. There's nothing like the cloud when that happens. We like when we learned launching, hey, suddenly 300,000 users signed up to try our services in 3 weeks instead of our forecast of 30,000 in 6 months. But he's saying those conditions are good for, like, that's what the cloud is good for. But he's saying that neither of those two conditions apply to us today. They never did for Basecamp. Yet by continuing to operate in the cloud, we're paying at times almost absurd premium for the possibility that it could. It's like paying a quarter of your house's value for an earthquake insurance when you don't live anywhere near a fault line. Yeah, sure, if somehow a quake 2 states over opens the earth so wide it cracks your foundation, you might be happy to have it, but it doesn't feel proportional, does it? So he goes on to explain how his company, Hey, is paying over $500,000 a year, over $500,000 a year for databases, RDS in AWS, and search, basically allow you to query your databases, which is Elasticsearch on Amazon. Um, and those are the two services he has, just for those two services. And he says, he admits, like, when you're processing email from many tens of thousands of customers, there's a lot of data to analyze and store. But he says it's kind of absurd. And, honestly, I kind of agree with him. For $500,000 a year, you might as well start investing in your own server equipment. And that's kind of what he goes on to say. So going in that direction, he thinks a better solution, a better investment of his time and money, particularly money, is to buy his own servers and to host his own servers and to manage his own servers. Now, depending on what your mid-level business is doing, it's not always going to work that way, or it might incur a little bit more cost that you might not see on the front side of the argument. So, for example, if you want to sell your software solution to a government entity, it needs to go through this process, which is called a FedRAMP authorization, which basically means that you need to have an assessor look at your environment and say, all right, this is good to go. This is good to sell to the government. So it's a very arduous process to try to sell to the government. And on the cloud, it makes it a little bit easier because you are not responsible for the physical safety of those servers that you run, right? So it's not on the service or the SaaS provider's plate to actually have armed guards outside of their server farms or whatever, however they secure their physical servers. It's not their job to do that. And it's already been authorized through government entities to say that, hey, Amazon and Google and Microsoft, their security is on. So we already know that that's good to go. So if you're a mid-level company thinking about buying your own servers and selling to the government, you're going to need to provide that security for whatever servers you buy. And, that has to be, I don't know. I wasn't on the side of the house where, I need to know the exact specifications of what security measures need to be taken place as far as physical security. I'm not on that side of the house. I just build the stuff, right? But I know there are certain parameters that have to be met in order for you to qualify for that physical security aspect. What is up, Tech Chief? Asses me, Poppy. That's not assess, but that's fine. We don't spell good here. We don't spell good in IT. Sell me to the gov, Poppy. Thank you. Thank you, Tech Chief. But yeah, that's one aspect you might not, be aware of if you're planning on selling to the government, right? The government's kind of a cash cow. So if you're mid-level business, maybe selling to the government is a good idea. But anyway, I digress. If you don't need any of that and you're not selling to the government, then, maybe investing 500,000 plus a year into your own servers is probably a good idea. You might want to do that. What's up? Christian Soto, welcome back with the broccoli emojis. Ass is me. Get it. Why is no one laughing? I don't know. Probably because we only have 3 viewers on Tech Chief. So maybe people will laugh on the replay, all 10 of my viewers on the replay. Let's see. Self-taught. Get money coding. Sorry, I called you by your old name. Cody, do you think it's dumb to start in the cloud for a small bootstrap company that hasn't yet generated cash flow? I think it is a very good idea for a small bootstrap company. Because, like I mentioned earlier and earlier in this article, the cloud is very cheap for very low trafficked environments, right? So, for example, I've run my own stuff on Google Cloud, obviously, but it's not getting a lot of traffic, guys. Like, one of my websites is for a business that isn't even launched yet. So I'm just running a website that probably only gets spam, spam visits and stuff like that. So, it's costing my entire cloud bill of all the projects I have is about $2 a month. And even like I have a couple e-commerce sites for some low traffic small businesses and other accounts that are billed to someone else. And even those are only, they're only doing like max, maybe less than $10 a month. So they're really not getting any, they're really not getting charged anything for their infrastructure costs. Like, granted, that's partially due to the way I set it up. But that's another point that I want to bring up later as well. But I mean, if you're starting a small business, absolutely, you should host your stuff on the cloud, dependent on a couple of things I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So basically, this article, the general overview is to kind of vilify the cloud a little bit. And I get it, guys. Trust me. Sometimes it's well-deserved, right? He goes on to say how Amazon is just printing profits with their profit margin at like 30%, 18.5 billion in profits on 62 billion in revenue. So they're raking in. They're raking in the money. They're raking in the money when it comes to cloud services. But the reason is, convenience. That's why everyone uses the cloud, is convenient. But it's also very expensive, and you give up a lot of other things when you pay for that convenience as well. So, and there are a couple things that I wanted to mention that I personally think about cloud as well. And, I have like a small pros and cons list that I'm going to look at my show notes for, because I can't remember anything anymore because I'm getting old. But that's fine. So let me go over some pros, right? So for like I said, for small projects and small business, I would say use the cloud. It's very cost effective. It costs less than buying your own server and then, being responsible for the uptime of that server, paying electricity to run those servers, etc. If you're just running like a very low trafficked website, and by low traffic, I'm I would say under, probably 1,000 requests per second, like sustained. That's what I would consider like low traffic, maybe 500 or less. But if you have an e-commerce site, unless you're like some kind of major corporation, you're probably not going to have a lot of transactions per second or requests per second at that. Also, another consideration, if you want a very streamlined process from start to finish, like, for example, it takes almost no work to, if you're already a developer, or let's say you hire a developer and you tell him, hey, I want you to build my website, and you know a little bit about cloud. And he's like, I want to host it on the cloud. Well, you have stuff like Heroku, which is super cheap and super easy to host stuff on. Or if your developer is, kind of flexible enough, you could tell them, hey, can you containerize it so I can like put it on Cloud Run, and that way I can have my instances scaled to 0, so it doesn't cost me anything when no one's using it. And anything that involves, like for example, even if you're working with services inside the same cloud environment, right? It's very a streamlined process to be able to use managed services together. So like if you're using RDS on AWS and you have an EC2 instance, it's very easy to link those two together and have your app have a backend compatible with it, a database compatible with it. And it's very easy to migrate services from, one service to the next, right? Or migrate data from one service to the next. Also, if you're using managed services, it makes development work super easy, like so easy. If you use all managed services, then essentially you could literally deploy your entire application with a couple clicks of a button. Like for example, Cloud Run. I know I use this example a lot, but Elastic Beanstalk is kind of similar on AWS, right? Where you literally give it a container image and it runs the container image, and then you can literally click through the console and connect the database and all this other stuff relatively easily. So it's easy to develop on and deploy and set up like continuous integration and continuous deployment. So if you make changes to your code, you can set up literally on Google's console, be like, hey, I want to add CI/CD to this. And you can link it to a GitHub webhook. And every time you push your code to the main branch, it will kick off a new revision of your deployment. So that kind of stuff makes it really easy. Also, the crazy amount of documentation to even do that is there. Like Google themselves have their documentation on how to host a React app on Cloud Run. They have documentation on like how to host a PHP app on, compute engine, right? They have a whole bunch of documentation specifically for doing common things. And there's all the answers on Stack Overflow are typically pretty accurate. And tutorials on YouTube, for example, like my channel, I'm not thinking of this stuff from the top of my head usually. Usually I think, wow, this would be a really good idea. Let me see if someone's actually done it before. And chances are, I'm giving away the secret sauce a little bit, but it's already been done. I typically work with like larger, larger data sets in my day job. But I mean, for small stuff, like the tutorials are out there. What is up? Dude, the chat is lit right now. This is the most lit my chat has ever been. Broccoli to the 4th power. Now we got peach emojis. Make it. I take pictures of things so I can remember now. My memory ain't what it used to be. Is that not the truth, man? I feel like my brain has so much information about everything else that it just slowly pushes out like critical information. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I don't know if that's by design. Is that a mango? I don't know what that is. I can't see, guys. My eyes are old man eyes. Your request has been approved. Max Dignitas with an actual question. If you store data on AWS, does Amazon own it? Good question. And we're going to get to that a little bit later. So technically, actually, we'll get to it right now. Technically, the content of the data, they don't own the content, right? But they own it when it is stored on their platform. So they're responsible for the data storage itself, right? So, for example, if you happen to upload some naughty things to AWS, whatever that may be, some illegal things, Amazon is not on the hook for that. The person who uploaded it is on the hook for that. But for example, they kind of get best of both worlds. Obviously they're not gonna open themselves up to liability. They can just be like, oh well, we just provided services. We didn't tell them that they could host that stuff. So they're not responsible for the content of what you're hosting, but they can control whether or not it's removed. They can control whether or not they give it to a federal agency or a local agency, for example. So they don't technically own the content, but they own where it's stored, and they pretty much own it. But they don't have any of the liability for it, is what I should say, which is convenient. I think it's pretty convenient. Alex Jones memory leak syndrome. Yeah, that's what it is, man. All the Alex Jones quotes going into my head and just remembering is pushing out all the critical life information I need to know. But yeah, so that's a good point. They don't, like I said, they don't own the content, but they kind of own it. It's like this weird gray area where, you know, if the feds look at Amazon and they're like, hey, dude, you got some real suspect stuff you got hosted, they can be like, oh, well, here's the person that hosted it. That's not on us. But at the same time, if they don't like it or the government tells them to take it down, Amazon's not going to say, oh, no, we don't own it. We can't do that. No, they're going to take it down immediately. So yeah, they kind of get best of both worlds, unfortunately. And that goes into my cons list. One more pro though, you get a lot of out of the box solutions for cloud in general. Like for example, I know I keep going back to it. It's just a good service, guys. It's Cloud Run. You get HTTPS, so you get certificates. You get a running application with instances. You can add load balancing to it right out of the box by literally giving it a container image and telling it what port to run on. Pretty good. I mean, you can't really beat it as far as, convenience goes there. So now onto my cons list, my favorite part of the list, right? Exactly. They get to have their cake and eat it too. Most of these big tech companies do. They're in bed with the government. I mean, let's be honest. Now to my cons list. So obviously, as we saw in the article, it has an extremely high cost as a mid-level company, where you don't have the profit margin of like a Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 company, but you're still making some good money and you need a lot of compute power, right? Or you need a lot of data storage, whatever the case may be. It costs a lot of money. I'm talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars into the millions of dollars range. Like it is astronomically expensive depending on your type of data storage, how often you're going to access that data, how many instances you need to run your application, and load balancing. And dude, it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. It is an incredible amount of stuff. Not to mention, this is another con. When you're setting all of this stuff up, if you don't have a dedicated cloud team or you don't want to pay professionals to do it, you can incur a lot of extra costs that you might not even realize you're incurring. So take, for example, if you're a developer, if you're a software developer, you don't know a ton about cloud and you want to host an app on there and it blows up to this like relatively, big business and you're making a lot of money and you're getting a lot of requests through your cloud services and you need to scale certain things up. Well, when you go to do that, you kind of have to plan a way forward, because if you don't, you're just going to end up creating all of these services and all of these things that you may or may not need. They might be configured incorrectly or just less efficiently. And it's going to cost you money, and it's going to cost you time, and it's going to cost you customers potentially. And it's going to get very confusing for your developers to manage that kind of stuff. So then what do? You hire a cloud professional. You hire someone like me. You hire a cloud consultant to be like, all right, what can we do? Like, we built all this stuff. Our bill is astronomical. What can we do to cut the cost? You're now going to have to pay them to fix your mistakes pretty much and fix your misconfigurations, which is going to cost money as well. Another con, as we talked about earlier, it's extremely centralized. So everything is ran by Amazon or everything is ran by Google, which is good and bad at the same time, because if they decide that they don't like what you're selling and they don't like your content or they don't like whatever the case may be, or maybe the government one day doesn't like what you're doing, they can cut you off. They can be like, you know what? You're not going to run your stuff on our services, and boom, your online business is gone overnight in a blink of an eye. And it literally can happen that fast. So it's not censor resistant. It's not at all, not censor resistant at all. Like, yeah, you can obfuscate it by hosting it on, multiple different platforms and getting data sources from anywhere and not using cloud native stuff. But, all that stuff takes a lot of know-how to do. Another question, Max Dignitas. Cody, have you looked at Planet Scale? I have not looked at Planet Scale. I'm going to Google that after the show because that's a really cool name. And that's how buzzwords work. So another thing I mentioned earlier is they can get out of control really quickly. So your cloud bill, not only your cloud bill, but just your, if you're writing it in code and you don't know how to format your code in a decent way, it can be a mess. Like for example, if you're using Terraform, this is a common issue that I've seen so many times is you have a cloud team that builds everything in Terraform. So all of their infrastructure is in code. And then you have a development team or a team of developers that just clicks through the console and creates stuff. Well, the problem with that is you have what you call state drift. And essentially, the cloud team is going to try to build more stuff using code, which is arguably the way you should do it. And they're going to try to apply these resources, but they're going to see a bunch of resources that they didn't create, or maybe it's changing, or maybe they're changing existing resources. Like maybe they scale up a machine, but they don't tell the cloud team because it's just like, hey, we need to fix this right now. You know, the hot fix comes in and they just fix it without going through Terraform code. Well, now when the cloud team redeploys that instance, it's going to go back to the original scale that it was at previously. So all that data that was stored as code is going to persist because you changed it, but you never updated the Terraform code. So now you have a problem where your state is completely different, and that might be, you know, you might have configured firewall rules to allow another application that was built to communicate with another application. Well, if that doesn't get updated in code, then that communication is going to get cut off if it wasn't there in the first place. So now you have two services that aren't communicating with each other because, you know, and it happens a lot in the startup environment. Like I understand things are very fast paced in the startup environment and some stuff just has to get fixed. I encourage you guys to just do it the right way the first time because it's going to cause a lot less headaches in the long run. Trust me. But I understand hot fixes happen and you got to fix stuff immediately. Just make sure your code reflects that when you're writing it, or at least notify your cloud team, be like, hey guys, we had to do this. Like, can you guys like make sure our Terraform code is fine? Your cloud team might not like you for it, but trust me, they're going to like you a lot less when you don't tell them about it and then they rebuild stuff and they have to put out fires all night when they're on call at 3 o'clock in the morning because another side of the world decides to use your services. May or may not be speaking from experience, but and my last con that I have for today is that it's hard to code it if you're not familiar with it. Like, I don't know if you guys saw my Terraform tutorial, but it was a very simple thing that essentially didn't really do much. And it took a decent amount of knowledge and code to be able to do it. And not your average guy, or not your average developer even knows how to do that in code. You know, a lot of them won't, and a lot of them it doesn't make sense to do it in code. But when you reach to a level where you actually need to do it in code, you're going to wish you did it in code previously. Max Ignitas with the right way TM. I'm going to get a coffee mug with that, or some kind of merch with that. Yeah, I mean, you know, it might not be the right way, but it is a way, you know, like it is not necessarily the right way, but these are kind of like the best practices, and it is going to make your life easier. And that's the thing with cloud in general is if you start by doing it quote unquote the right way or using best practices, it's very arduous in the beginning. But when you're looking 6 months to a year down the road, you're going to be like, dude, thank God we did it this way, because if not, this would have been a complete mess. Like now we have like, you know, our CI/CD pipelines established. We have our, you know, security groups established already, our firewall rules, our IAM permissions, our security is on point. If you start with that in the very beginning, when you get to the point where you need all of that stuff, it's going to be way cheaper, for one, because you're not going to have to hire a professional to come out and be like, yo, your stuff is all screwed up and I'm going to charge you a lot of money to fix it. And two, you're not even going to run into those issues when you get to that point either, because your infrastructure is set from the get-go. And it's scalable. It is scalable, but again, you need the knowledge behind it to learn how to scale it correctly, so you don't end up with like some crazy infrastructure or Terraform code that nobody wants to touch, or is going to charge you exuberant amounts of money to actually fix all of your Terraform code, quite frankly. So yeah, I'm not a cloud maxi. You know, some of you might disagree, and I know I preach it a lot. I preach about using the cloud, but for most people, it makes sense. But I do understand that some people it doesn't make sense. And maybe it makes more sense to host your own servers, buy your own servers, manage your own servers. Um, and maybe it'll be more cost effective for you. That's not a decision I can make for you. It's a decision you're gonna have to. I mean, I could make it for you, but I mean, at the end of the day, we can sit down and we can weigh, pros and cons like I did today, and I can determine whether or not I think cloud is a good solution for you to take. Like I said, typically, if you're really small, absolutely. If you're really big, you're probably already in the cloud. But if you're at that mid level, it's really going to depend. That's when having a conversation with someone that is very knowledgeable in the cloud space, in the infrastructure space, in the DevOps space, um, can save you a lot of money in the long run. So, like I said, I'm not a cloud maxi. I understand it has its faults. It's not perfect, but it is pretty cool. And I have a lot of fun doing it. And I think you guys will have a lot of fun doing it too. And not to mention, guys, it pays pretty well. Just saying, it pays pretty well. And you're not. Let's just say you're not working, 80 hours a week doing this job, right? I think that goes for developers too. My devs out here know. My devs out here know what's up. But like I said, I hope this live stream, this conversation was a little bit insightful for you and to make you realize that, like, yeah, I get it. Cloud is not all it's cracked up to be sometimes. And I get it. But, you know, weigh these options when you're starting a business that might grow to that level or you think might grow to that level, and kind of weigh your options from there. But I digress. If you need to get a hold of me, I'm going to put all of my information in the description. If you like what I had to say today, please like the video, leave a comment. If you don't like what I had to say, and make sure you subscribe for more content like this and more educational content in the future, because I want to teach you guys about cloud. But with that being said, you guys have a wonderful night and a wonderful rest of the week. Have a good night.